Welcome to Key Tech. Please describe this channel if you are interested in today's video. During Trump's ruling period, the United States engaged in a so-called U.S. priority principle, which means that at any time, it must be considered by the interests of the United States itself. In fact, the United States' blockade of China's semiconductor industry is to maintain its own hegemony and destroy the product of the global semiconductor industry chain. In order to suppress China, the United States launched a chip bill on the one hand, attracting TSMC and Samsung to build factories in the United States to induce semiconductor companies to decouple with mainland China. On the other hand, it also signed the Triple Agreement in conjunction with Japan and the Netherlands to jointly restrict the export of semiconductor equipment and technology to mainland China. The United States innocently believes that as long as the two countries with the core technology of the Netherlands have the core technology of the Netherlands in Japan, they can completely destroy China's semiconductor industry chain. But in fact, the so-called three-party agreement is not reliable. The United States is selfish, and the three-party agreement is not reliable. In order to cooperate with the United States restrictions on the semiconductor industry in the mainland, Japan will implement the most stringent semiconductor restrictions in the history on July 23. 23 semiconductor products are included in the control list, and most of the 23 products are needed by China. Including cleaning, film formation, heat treatment, exposure equipment, etc., many of them are necessary consumables for Chinese manufacturing chips. Once restricted means that Chinese chip production capacity is affected. And the process of these restrictions has been explored to 45 nanometers. If Japan strictly implements the ban, then the Chinese chip mass production process may be returned to 65 nanometers, or even 90 nanometers. However, I think this is just a surface action in Japan. Under the suppression of the United States 30 years ago, Japanese semiconductors fell from glory to decline. In the past 2 years, the Japanese government has always wanted to revive the strong wind of Japan's semiconductor. In August 2022, under the leadership of the Japanese government, 8 Japanese companies jointly invested nearly 8 billion yen to establish a Japanese semiconductor company Rapidus. The purpose of producing a 2 mm process is to replace TSMC, a semiconductor giant supported by the United States. Japan can have restricted the timing of China's semiconductor exports in the United States and the Netherlands to accelerate shipments to the Chinese market to help Japanese semiconductors return to its peak. I never expected that Japan would be willing to be the vassal of the United States. It completely forgot that the painful lesson of Japanese semiconductor in the 1980s was simply a good scar to forget the pain. Although Japan cannot be replaced in semiconductor materials, China accounts for 40% of the export share of Japanese semiconductor. After the announcement of Japan's restrictions on May 23, Japan's semiconductor stock price plummeted, and Japanese companies' budgets were affected by the ban. Japan's semiconductor exports will plummet by 20%, which is tantamount to disaster for Japanese semiconductor manufacturers. China occupies 40% of the export share of Japan's semiconductor. Japanese experts estimate that once the ban is strictly implemented, the Japanese semiconductor volume will plummet by 20%. This is completely unacceptable for Japan, which hopes to revive the semiconductor industry. Therefore, from the perspective of which perspective, the restrictions on the 23 semiconductor products are completely more disadvantaged for Japan, so follow-up Japan will definitely adjust it, so that China will wait and see. Regarding the US ban, the Netherlands has directly started Yang Fengyan violations. At present, the global semiconductor industry is sluggish, and wafer fabric plants, such as TSMC and Samsung, have delayed the expansion plan, so ASML began to increase shipments in the Chinese mainland market. Although the Dutch surface limits the exit of the high-end DUV lithography machine to the mainland, in fact, only 2000i and 2050i are limited. After that, you can make 7 nanometers chips. Recently, Shanghai Jita Semiconductor has purchased 6 ASML light engraved machines in one breath. Last year, the company had purchased 3 ASML lithography machines. In addition, when the US-Japan Lotus reached a 3-party agreement, ASML CEO visited China again after 6 years and took the initiative to seek cooperation with China. Obviously, it is to sing against the United States and firmly stand the mainland market. In this regard, the US media said, ASML CEO is really not a person. In general, the United States must be unwilling to die. The United States is losing control of allies, and the so-called science and technology hegemony is the end of the crossbow. This wave of operations in the United States not only cannot stop China's rise, but also allows ASML to recognize the importance of the Chinese market, and forcing Japan Rapidus to take a road of independence. In the end, the United States will handle the so-called global semiconductor industry chain created by itself, and the rise of the China core has become inevitable. The United States is losing control over its allies, and the so-called science and technology hegemony is the end of the crossbow. In addition to not being able to halt China's rise, this wave of operations in the United States also compelled Japan Rapidus to pursue independence and allow ASML to acknowledge the significance of the Chinese market. In the end, the so-called global semiconductor industry chain that the US created on its own will be handled, and the rise of the China core is now inevitable.